And if you look at your calendars, the first day of the week is Sunday. The seventh day of the week is Saturday. Also, you want to turn to Matthew chapter 27 with me. I'm looking at verse 64, and it reads, well, 62, sorry, verse 62. And it reads, "Now the next day that followed the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate." The preparation day is Friday. This is the King James Version. Reading in the NLT version, it says, "The next day on Sabbath, the leading priests and Pharisees went to see Pilate." It specifically says the next day on Sabbath, right? In the King James Version, it says, "Now the next day that followed the day of preparation." The day of preparation is Friday, but they're specifically speaking of the next day that followed the day. What's the next day after Friday? Saturday. So that's what the King James Version should say. I already read y'all from the NLT. Now let's go to Matthew chapter 28, verse 1. In the King James Version, it says, "In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn, toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see this sepulcher." Mind y'all, we went from the end of chapter 27 to the very first verse in chapter 28. It says, "In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn on the first day." The NLT version says specifically Sunday morning as it began to dawn. So in the NLT version, it's talking about Sunday morning. So in the King James Version, it says in the end of the Sabbath. So obviously we're speaking on Saturday being the Sabbath. Y'all can go back through and read these things for yourself, but let's go into Luke chapter 23 verse 54. That's the last Bible verse I'm gonna read. Okay, so Luke 23:54 reads, "In that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on." Again, what day is preparation day? Friday. And it says, "And the Sabbath drew on," because the preparation day is Friday, but Sabbath starts Friday night and it goes on through Saturday and ends Saturday night. So it says the Sabbath drew on. So we're speaking of Friday and then Sabbath, and Friday night through Saturday night Sabbath. But then in the NLT version, it specifically says this was done late on Friday afternoon, the day of preparation, as the Sabbath was about to begin. What I've noticed the difference is the NLT version gives you days specifically. It actually says the day specifically. Again, y'all can read this for yourselves. What this Matthew and Luke